Awesome. Hi, everyone. Panos here from PNOE, and today I'm very fortunate to have Dr. Meredith Sweeney on the PNOE webinar. Dr. Sweeney is one of our users, lifestyle medicine coach, and Dr. Sweeney has a long background in the medical industry. She was a bariatric surgeon. And after seeing a lot of the shortcomings in the space, she decided to transition into a more holistic and lifestyle approach when it comes to coaching and advising clients. Dr. Sweeney, first of all, thank you for joining me here today.
Thanks
It
so
is
much
great
for
to have
having
you.
me.
Yeah, of course. And today we're going to talk about how Dr. Sweeney uses information from the PNOE test as well as information from other sources like body composition and blood analysis in order to inform more precise and effective nutrition training and lifestyle planning. But before we get into that, Dr. Sweeney has a very interesting story that really highlights and delineates the shortcomings of the approaches that we find against weight loss within the traditional hardcore medical approach slash community, and how actually these point to the fact that real lifestyle modifications are sort of the only way for people to achieve sustainable results. So, Dr. Sweeney, floor is yours. I think a lot of us here are very excited to hear your story and what you have to offer.
Thank you. I Traditional medical system is so reactive and we treat based on things that happen. We're treating at the end of disease. Someone gets a diagnosis and we give them a pill, or someone is morbidly obese and someone like me comes in and does a weight loss surgery on them. This is what I did for the first 13 years of my career after general surgery residency. Um, within the last 5 years, I just developed a real passion for looking at things from more of a proactive approach. As a bariatric surgeon, I spent the majority of my time actually in the office talking with patients about optimizing their metabolic health outside of the operating room. I would give them this huge launching pad in the form of a surgery to get them started and off on their weight loss journey, but unless they could adopt the lifestyle that was necessary to maintain it and get the most benefit out of it, they weren't going to be as successful. And so I started going to conferences that were more focused on longevity and metabolic health. And eventually I just decided I'm not going to stay at this end of the spectrum anymore. I'm not going to treat the very end of disease. And the disease that I was treating was morbid obesity. Um, I want to move to the other side. And so now I'm on a proactive lifestyle based. I opened my own practice called Sano Longevity in Louisville, Kentucky in March. And that's what I do here. I talk with people about optimizing their lifestyle, but I do it with a very tailored approach that is distinctly created for them based on their data, their metabolic breath analysis, their VO2 max test, their body composition analysis, and blood work. And then I can identify the best path forward for them to achieve their optimal health now, to feel the best that they could ever think of feeling, but also set them up for success so that they're the most functional 80 and 90-year-old that they can be.
Amazing. No, this is a very noble approach, and kudos to this incredible transition. I know a lot of us in this space talk a lot about how the traditional medical system is very reactive and it has to be proactive. We need to tackle lifestyle problems if we are to achieve sustainable results, but still, it's the minority of you guys who are making the transition. And, before we go into, actually dissecting the method and the approach that you have, combining metabolic testing, blood testing, body composition. A few questions about, how your approach is being received by your community.
Mm.
I understand you're in a area that is unfortunately notorious for having a very high rate of obesity. And typically when that happens, people from these communities typically tend to go for the pill solution, the easy solution. So, are you seeing changes in sentiment? Are you seeing that, even people from these categories that are traditionally very prone to shape solutions and sort of approaches. Are you seeing these people really opening up to the possibility that, to make lifestyle changes, even though that may end up being a longer, but at the end of the day, more sustainable path?
It is um, really exciting to see people adopt this way of life. And this is where social media, I think, has been a good thing. Promoting healthier lifestyles, promoting proactive approaches, and allowing people to take control of their own destiny. I think that this is becoming more common. If you look at alcohol use is going down. People are getting more sober with rapid numbers. That's just one example. But I would love to see the same thing happen with the food system. Let's eliminate the processed foods and move towards whole foods and celebrate that. So culturally and societally, I think we are making that shift backwards, but it's going to be hard because it's human nature to want a quick fix. We all want something that's easy, that's going to do the work for us, but that we can see results immediately. And people that come and see me, they don't necessarily see results immediately, but the results that they work very hard to get their results, are going to be worth so much more and so much more sustainable in the long run. It's really hard to sell a program that is based on the long run, but I'm doing it and it's working, and word of mouth has been my best marketing tool. People exude more positive energy when they're making positive choices in their daily lives for their health. And that's where I'm getting most of my referrals is people tell me, well, my sister noticed that there's been a shift in me. Or, you don't even have to drop 100 pounds, but there's a shift in your overall well-being when you're starting to take agency and take control and using evidence-based data to optimize your own health. People around you feel it and they want to know what you're doing.
Totally, totally. This, feel better state, even though that might not necessarily translate immediately to actually showing significantly different, that is contagious
It
in
is.
terms of the excitement it exudes, to your
Right.
point. I can totally relate to that. I've seen that with my parents, taking them from a very unhealthy lifestyle to a very healthy one, and how their friends and other relatives are actually following suit. So that was a very helpful introduction. Why don't we go a little bit deeper and in greater detail into how you're using metabolic testing, resting, VO2 max testing with body composition, blood analysis. What is the rationale behind collecting all of these biomarkers, and what are some connections you're drawing between insights from these tests and specific recommendations for nutrition, training, and lifestyle?
Um, when I first decided that I was going to make the leap away from traditional medicine and call myself a longevity focused physician, I knew that VO2 max testing had to be a part of my program. It's the number one predictor of longevity. If I'm going to sit in this space, I had to have a VO2 max testing capabilities in my office. And so that's what led me to seek out PNOE to begin with. All the other information that PNOE gives you with both the resting report and the active report, just aside from even that VO2 max score, have been surprising additions to my practice to help patients achieve their ultimate outcome. So when someone comes and sees me, their first appointment is it's just a testing and data collection appointment. I do the PNOE resting metabolic test. I do the VO2 max test. I also do a body composition analysis in my office on a fancy scale. I also do blood work to check longevity biomarkers, and this is broken down to inflammatory markers, metabolic health markers, vitamins, minerals. So I put all that information together and then I create what I call a roadmap for them. And it's a nutrition plan that's focused on what their caloric needs are and broken down into an appropriate distribution of macronutrients. It's appropriate for that patient because I also take into account the other data. If they're diabetic, then their carbohydrate intake and versus protein and fat is going to look a little bit different. If it's someone who's an athlete who's completely metabolically flexible, then their macronutrient breakdown is going to look different. So the PNOE data provides me with that baseline caloric information so I know where we should be sitting from a calorie standpoint. But when we're talking about the other buckets of longevity, you have to take into account someone's exercise program, their stress, how they're managing their stress in real life, and another important bucket is their sleep. And so PNOE, the resting test, gives me this information that is so useful to help identify those other areas. When I can check if their parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system is driving their respiratory rate more or less, then I can tell, and also heart rate variability, I can tell how overly stressed that patient may be, whether they know it or not. This might be their complete normal state, but if I detect that their sympathetic nervous system is in overdrive, then that means that their cells at the cellular level, they are in sympathetic overdrive and their cells may be prematurely aging. So I talk with people a lot about instituting breathwork practices, good sleep hygiene so that they can optimize their heart rate variability and take the stress off of their cells, everything that's going on underneath the surface that they don't even know. So that's where the resting metabolic test adds value in surprising ways for me and for most patients.
Mhm.
And then using the other data from the VO2 max test, I can tell them their training zones.
Mhm.
Training zones and optimizing your cellular and mitochondrial health are so important. Spending time in the appropriate zone two, getting that mitochondrial boosting benefit, and then spending time in high intensity sessions where you're getting up into zone 4 and 5 is really are really important metrics. Whether someone is an athlete or not, it doesn't matter. Your average housewife needs to be spending time in each of these zones, and it's the PNOE VO2 max test that helps me identify those zones.
Mhm.
And in some way, shape, or form, everyone that leaves in my office ends up with some sort of heart rate monitor because we want to be optimizing and training in those zones. Um, what else did you ask? That was kind of a
The
loaded
other
question.
question, yeah. The other part of the question was, how do we combine other forms of assessment with breath analysis, and what kind of like compounding effect are you seeing in terms of the value that you are delivering to the customer when, in addition to the VO2 max and resting metabolic rate test, you're adding a body composition test or you're adding a longevity blood panel. Um, uh, when many people truly believe in the fact that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts when it comes to adding more data points. But I want to hear from you, what are potentially these additive benefits that you're seeing when you're combining biomarkers?
So let's start with the body composition analysis. So this is an advanced scale that tells you how much body fat you have and how much muscle you have, also body water, other metrics. But what I do is I use that initial one as a baseline, and then I develop a training program for them based on all the data that I gather. And then we use it to monitor and make sure that they're never losing lean mass. And if we're changing our weight, that it's coming from the fat mass category as opposed to
Mhm.
losing lean mass. This is exquisitely important for anyone that's on weight loss medications. I'm sure that's not, you're not surprised to hear that, and you've heard that before, but especially
It's
when we're,
actually a very big, value proposition for people administering GLP-1s to their clients. GLP-1s, for those who are not aware of that in the audience, they are notorious for decreasing muscle mass because they lead people to cut calories, and in many cases, that calorie restriction isn't complemented with some sort of resistance training. That's one reason, but people are hypothesizing that there are other hormonal reasons behind that muscle
Mhm.
reduction. But ultimately, the net effect is that there's less muscle, and really need to be mindful of that, because when you get into muscle reduction, someone's metabolism declines, and then it becomes very difficult for the person to maintain the weight loss that has been achieved. So, there you go. You need to be actually
Extremely
measuring.
difficult.
Yeah. exactly.
And when people are losing muscle mass, they're taking years off of their life, whether they
100%.
know it or not. Now you're affecting your longevity.
Mm,
After I do a comprehensive evaluation on something, including the PNOE system and the blood markers and the body composition analysis, I can appropriately identify how much protein, for example, they should be taking in, how many
mhm,
strength training sessions they should be having a week, and the details of what they should be doing during those strength training sessions to make sure that they're keeping muscle mass on. And as we get older,
mhm,
we develop something called anabolic resistance. So it becomes harder to keep muscle, let alone put muscle on. And women during changing hormonal phases of perimenopause and menopause have to deal with this possibly, well, certainly even from a more distinct and uh, creative avenue than men do in order to keep muscle. So back to your question, I use the body composition analysis to trend what we're doing as we're working along together in a program and make sure that we are maintaining that muscle mass. From a blood marker standpoint, the way that I combine that is I need to know how metabolically healthy someone is. So that means I have to check a fasting insulin level. Fasting insulin, if we're looking at the continuum of what metabolic dysfunction is, you can identify metabolic dysfunction way before a hemoglobin A1C is going to tell you that something is awry. So, fasting insulin levels, I check on absolutely every patient, and that's how I know how to create their nutrition program in terms of how they should be structuring their carbohydrate intake, how many carbohydrates they should be taking in total. And again, I use that over that caloric number that the PNOE is going to give me, but then I use the blood panel to help decide how those macronutrients should be divided.
And
Um,
it's, I'm guessing the general rationale where if someone is on the higher end of fasting insulin, then you're going to prescribe less carbohydrates,
right,
whereas someone who is more on the healthier side, their body can tolerate more. Is
right.
that yeah, yeah.
Someone that has
And-
plenty of muscle, that's very active, that's
yeah.
metabolically flexible, that has a normal fasting insulin, we don't need to be monitoring carbohydrates so much. Someone that's on the
Mhm.
other end and they're diabetic or pre-diabetic, then we need to be very strategic and lowering that patient's carbohydrate intake. And every patient in my office gets one of these glucose monitors as well. This is another way that we help track and teach. Um, what is happening under the surface with the food
Mhm.
that you're consuming
Mhm.
on a daily basis. So glucose
Mhm.
monitors are a big part of my practice as well.
Hmm. No, that's amazing. Um, what about some of the lipid markers or some of the hormone markers? Are these part of the longevity blood panel? Are you looking into them at all?
I do this on an individual basis
Okay.
for females that have questions or issues that are coming up. We will dive into the perimenopause and menopause sex hormones.
Hmm.
For men, if they're having issues putting muscle on, if they're having symptoms of low testosterone, I'll
Hmm.
jump in there.
Hmm.
I don't routinely check cortisol levels. I think that's fairly useless
Hmm.
in mainstream practice. And plus, unless you're testing in a morning cortisol level, then you're not getting accurate data anyway. So hormones are not a huge part of my practice, but on a
Hmm.
case by case basis, they can become important.
No, de definitely. And what we've seen, because a lot of the Pinoy markers can be sort of like predictive or portend certain blood biomarkers, men that have a lower metabolism, so metabolic rate score that is, trending around 50% or below, these people very likely have low testosterone levels. So there's a very high degree of correlation there. And then when it comes to respiratory exchange ratio and how efficiently you're converting fat into energy, or in other words, how much fat you're utilizing at rest, this is perhaps the earliest possible indicator of whether someone is becoming metabolically inflexible and therefore is in some sort of route towards becoming diabetic or metabolically unhealthy in general. And so typically when we see a low fat burn efficiency, meaning the person is not consuming enough amounts of fat at rest while fasted, that typically means that, if they do a blood test, their metabolic markers like fasting insulin or even, fasting glucose, or in many cases, hemoglobin A1C, one of these markers, if not all, will start to err on the problematic side. So just for people to have that in mind and, understand that metabolic testing could also be used as a way to not necessarily diagnose, but get early indicators of whether someone is on the metabolically healthier or unhealthier side.
Exactly. And that is just like I said, that fasting insulin level is is a warning sign that there's impending serious issues. Just like you said, that respiratory exchange ratio may change even before that insulin level changes. So this is something that we can use in our global clinical picture to monitor patients and to monitor therapies. We want to, I bring patients back in 3 months and I redo a lot of the tests to make sure that we're making progress. And if we're not, we'll figure out why or tweak their plan as necessary. But most patients are making significant progress. I had a patient yesterday, her mitochondrial function was not stellar. I think she was in the 30% for her mitochondrial function. And within 3 months of walking and eating more fat, she was able to increase her mitochondrial function. And for anyone that doesn't know, your mitochondria are just the energy producing portions of your cell. And if they're functioning well, it translates in real life to having like more pep in your step. You feel better, you're cognitively more aware, you have more pep in your step, you're more vibrant. So mitochondrial health translates to that, and we can track that with PNOE.
Mhm. Also, we got a question by one of our listeners, specifically relating to autonomic nervous system assessment during the resting test. It's a great question, actually. I wanted to sort of clarify that. So thanks for the question. So, um, when you're doing the resting test, you have the mask on, which is doing gas exchange analysis, but at the same time, you're wearing a heart rate monitor that doesn't just measure heart rate, it measures what we call full spectrum HRV. So we do a spectrum domain analysis of heart rate variability, looking into the low frequency, high frequency, and very low frequency components of heart rate variability. And by taking the ratio of low frequency to high frequency, or vice versa, you sort of get an indication of your sympathovaggal balance, which is, in other words, how much your sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems, respectively, are being engaged. So from that analysis, you can understand, to what extent someone is on the sympathetic or parasympathetic side. Now, that independently can be influenced by the way you breathe. So, people that are on the parasympathetic side will likely exhibit more perturbed and unhealthier breathing patterns. In other words, they're going to be breathing more rapidly. They're going to be breathing more shallow, and there's a very high degree of bidirectional connection between the brain and the lungs, and whenever either the brain or the nervous system gets, out of control, and that pretty much means we're shifted on the and on the sympathetic side, that's going to influence the lungs. But then vice versa, we see a lot of cases, this is like a different category of pathologies. We see a lot of different cases where people have breathing issues that may be stemming from allergies, deviated septums, susceptibility to sleep apnea, and so on and so forth. And because of these poor breathing patterns, they can stimulate sympathetic response that,
Right.
as Dr. Sweeney alluded to
And
earlier,
it's
that
it's
can
all
have
a
a very,
circle.
yeah,
Like your
that can
your
have a very,
brain can influence how your respiratory rate and exchange and all that stuff. But similarly, there's a feedback loop going the other direction. And if your breathing is off because you're struggling with, like you said, allergies, or you're so obese that it's hard to breathe, then that's going to send a signal up to your brain that you need to be stressed out. You're not getting oxygen in very well. So it's this circle that we can then intervene and measure how well our interventions are working with things like targeted relaxation, teaching someone breath work and meditation, or if there's a functional issue, like you said, deviated septum or sleep apnea that's undiagnosed, we can treat those in the more traditional medical sense.
100%. And this shift towards the sympathetic side is going to cause a whole cascade of endocrine effects.
Yeah.
Cortisol goes up. Cortisol works antagonistically with testosterone and other sex hormones, which are important for muscle preservation and so on and so forth. So, the whole system gets out of whack. Uh,
Yeah. I
just
love
just
saying
just
that
by yeah.
nothing exists in a vacuum, that everything affects each other. And if you positively impact one area, you're gonna see the effects in other areas. Same thing in
Mhm.
reverse. If you have a negative impact coming in, let's say for your sleep, then your nutrition is more likely to be negatively impacted.
Mhm.
Everything is related.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And just from our observational standpoint, looking into thousands and thousands of tests every month, I can safely say that by far the most common anatomical problem that we run into is some sort of breathing abnormality that stems from either some sort of mouth or nose malformation. So someone has a deviated septum, someone has, perturbed pellet that is creating breathing issues, or in many cases, people develop poor breathing patterns because of lifestyle, because of posture, because of, past traumas or traumatic experiences. So all of
Mhm.
these things may cause someone to breathe abnormally, and that, in many cases, can be, if not the root cause, a significant contributor to bad metabolic health. So to your point, Dr. Sweeney, there's, absolute necessity when you're dealing with metabolic health overall, assess someone's breathing because, it may be the case that if you fix someone's breathing through targeted meditation, relaxation, go to the ENT, whatever the case is,
Mhm.
you can have a very profound impact on their metabolism as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Uh, we had another question about what tests you do to check mitochondrial health. Um, Mitochondrial health is a very broad term, and if you were to measure mitochondrial directly, you would need to do extremely invasive and costly procedures that are not even available to the public. It's stuff that you do in the lab. You need to do mass spectrometry and spectroscopy on cells that you isolate. So what we do is we do biomarker testing of proxies, and that would be insulin levels, that would be glucose. So you're sort of trying to measure things that are affected by good or bad mitochondrial function. And so mitochondrial health is sort of like a very broad thing. Uh, One of the easiest things to measure when it comes to mitochondrial fitness is actually the respiratory exchange ratio that is tested from metabolic analyzer like 𝐾𝐲. So you're measuring VCO2 and VO2 ratio, which ultimately tells you how many fats and carbs your body's burning. And, by measuring that in a resting condition or in an exercise condition, you can understand how well cells are, not cells in general, but mitochondria specifically, are responding to food availability. So I hope that sort of answers the question. But yeah, Dr. Sweeney, didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, that's okay. I think exactly like you said, it's impossible, or we don't have a way right now, just out in the community in the clinic to measure mitochondria directly. So you look at all these other markers. And if someone, let's say using a PNOE test and you're looking at their respiratory exchange ratio, if they are effectively able to use fat for fuel for a long time during a VO2 max test, for example, that means that their mitochondria are functioning better, that that patient is more conditioned.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, respiratory exchange ratio is probably the best way that we have to tell whether someone is able to effectively convert their fuel into energy, which is what the mitochondria are doing at the cellular level. And
Correct.
fat is the fuel that mitochondria prefer, and they run most cleanly when you're giving
Mhm.
them fat for fuel as opposed to, let's say,
Mhm.
processed carbohydrates.
Mhm. And ultimately, the other thing that a lot of people are now beginning to realize, and that ties in with what Dr. Sweeney just described, is that the more oxygen you push into the system, the healthier you are. And turns out that fat is a molecule that always requires oxygen to be burnt. And so, whenever there is oxygen availability down to the cell, that means that the cell is going to prefer fat as a fuel source. And so that ties in well with the general notion that more oxygen typically means more health. And if you think about it this way, uh, the more oxygen you have, the more effectively the cells are working, the lungs are working, the heart is working, and blood circulation is working. And that's why, ultimately VO2 max, which is the total amount of oxygen our body can consume at peak, is sort of the global KPI of how well this chain that comprises lungs, heart, blood circulation, and ultimately cells, how well that chain is actually working.
What is KPI?
So key performance index. Sorry, it's
Okay.
my business owner hat comes on a few
Yeah.
times. I sort of use
Okay. So for the
terminology.
rest of us, thank you for
Yeah,
clarifying.
no, no, it's good you're pointing that out. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Dr. Sweeney, any other thoughts that you would like to share with our audience? I think we had a great conversation, but if there's anything else you would like to touch upon before we wrap up.
Yeah, no, just thank you for your time. Thank you for
Of
having
course.
me. I
Hmm.
think when you're approaching a longevity plan from a lifestyle standpoint, it is really important to collect individualized data and then have measurable outcomes for whatever plan that you're going to institute because people want to see results. And so PNOE makes that very easy. I mean, blood work is easy as well, but PNOE makes it very easy to make some changes in a patient's lifestyle and retest 3 months later and see what's going on and celebrate those wins or change the trajectory of your plan if the information isn't what you see.
Absolutely. And, to your point, Dr. Sweeney, breath analysis at the end of the day, one of its most important selling points is that it is very well encompassing. It looks into lungs, heart, and cells and nervous system
Mhm.
without needing any sort of blood draw or other invasive procedure. Obviously, it's not the end all be all assessment. There's other things that we need to look into in order to get a truly comprehensive and complete picture of the body that we're trying to evaluate. But it's typically one of the best, if not the best, place to start when we evaluate someone. And for those who are not aware of the fact that we are actually building and launching very soon a comprehensive platform where you will be able to integrate your blood data, urine, stool, saliva, and also very soon DNA data so that you can aggregate all of this information along with breath analysis into one dashboard and get very comprehensive insights into what is happening with your client's health. And obviously combine that with wearable data, since that actually tells us what is happening from a lifestyle perspective. So my team just posted a link for those who want to learn more or have questions about how to use PNOE, how can PNOE help your business, and so on and so forth. You can use the link to schedule some time with one of our experts. Dr. Sweeney, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And we look forward to continuing to work with you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. Have a good one.